All right. Well, welcome everybody to the IJIS Institute Cybersecurity webinar. I hope you're all having a great day. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We think we have a really solid agenda planned. We're going to actually have a panel of cybersecurity professionals where we're going to do a bit of a Q&A session with them. And then at the end, for the audience at the end, we will actually have a Q&A session for you as well, where we're going to be fielding some of your questions related to cybersecurity, what's going on in the news, just kind of anything that you want to talk about. So just to kick things off, my name is Larry Zorio. I am the chair of the IJIS Cybersecurity Working Group. And that's what I do in my volunteer time. But my full time is that I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Mark 43. We are a CAD and RMS system that is in the cloud. You can see the other individuals that are going to be on with me with the panel today. You can see their names in the screen. I'm going to do a lot more formal introductions with them in just a few minutes. But we do have kind of a few, let's call it level setting slides that we want to go over with the audience on just who IJIS is. And I want to have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the cybersecurity working group as well. So if we could move on to the next slide. First and foremost, like, who are we? Who is IJIS? The IJIS Institute, it is a non-profit collaboration network. And it is kind of focused on, mission outcomes, enabling technology, certainly focused on the public sector. And we'll kind of, as we go through, we'll go into kind of really all the different areas that IJIS gets involved in. But the most important thing is this is a nonprofit organization that really brings different people around the community to get together to put on webinars like this and a lot of other great things. What does IJIS do? The Institute advocates for policies, processes, information sharing standards. It really kind of helps, again, builds policies around many different areas of the public safety sector. It gets involved in technology and architecture. Gets involved in certainly cybersecurity, which I am part of that group. But it's really, like I mentioned, it's bringing different stakeholders, groups from all around together, understanding what the community's interests are, and then how we can help the community by giving back with different events, documents, webinars like this. There are many domains and many kind of focus areas of IJIS. They are on the screen today, just to fire, emergency, medical, criminal justice, public safety, homeland security. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see them all on the screen here. I mentioned kind of the public safety side, but if you look kind of to the right, there's education, critical infrastructure. IJIS really covers a lot. So hopefully, I hope our audience, I hope there's members from all of these different focus areas on the webinar today, which would be fantastic. And we can field some of your questions at the end. This is really kind of how the IJIS environment is really broken down. You can see the top left, we have a board of directors from the private sector. And then to the right, we have a board of directors on the public side, the public sector. And then really it's all around building a mission-specific advisory groups and committees. You can see them kind of in the middle of the screen there. There is a law enforcement advisory committee. There is a corrections advisory committee, criminal justice and information sharing. There is an emergency communication. There's a courts. There's a data analytics. There's an information technology. And this actually isn't all of them, because there are a lot of working groups, task forces that are underneath these kind of advisory committees that you see on the screen today. So now kind of dovetailing into what does the cybersecurity working group do. So we have a few members of the working group as part of the panel today. Again, I am the chair of this panel. And, similar to the other groups, right, we are bringing in subject matter experts from really around the public safety sector and even some of those other sectors that we showed earlier. And really our goal is to develop standards, help the community with best practices, give recommendations on maybe where you want to go with your program with cybersecurity. Really, and even doing a webinar like this, there's some of the things that we do. Taking it a step further, a little bit of plug on the working group. We are actually doing a lot in this space right now. We're starting to build a lot of content for the community. We just published a white paper a few months ago that really kind of talks at a big level, a program around cybersecurity. If you are going to be building a program, these are some of the areas that you should think about. And we dive a little bit deeper into many areas of cybersecurity. So it's a really good resource to go look at. That is kind of on the larger side of a document. The working group also understands that people retain information in different ways. So we're now trying a few other creative ways where we're going to be having much smaller kind of micro 2-page documents that are very specific on certain topics. So our most recent one that we're going to be publishing very, very soon is going to be around how you should even think about choosing a framework that maybe you want to follow in your organization, and what works best for you. And we have some recommendations there. So you're going to start seeing a lot of those. With a smaller document, we can put a lot more of those out. So we're hoping to do this on a monthly cadence, come out with some sort of document. It could be a current event. Maybe it's a very critical vulnerability that is out there in the space, or it might be, how you further mature your organization or your agency. And then on top of that, some other creative things. We are thinking about even doing some podcasts, and certainly this will be the first of many webinars that we'll be doing in the past. And now on the screen, you can see some of our members with the companies below them of folks that we have on this working group. So we have a really good mix. We're always looking for others to join. So anybody who is listening, watching this webinar, if you are interested in joining this cybersecurity working group, we would love to have you. Please reach out to the IJIS committee leaders. Even myself, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to, and I'll put you in the right direction. So
currently I work for CyberWA. It's a private company that provides cybersecurity services to high net worth, ultra high net worth people and celebrities. I can tell you they have the same problems that the rest of us do. Before that, I spent quite a bit of time as an IT specialist for Cambridge, Massachusetts Public Safety, as well as a cyber threat intel analyst for the FBI, and then heading up the MSISAC's intel team, all of which means that plus my volunteering with different law enforcement related groups, I'm a pro at the acronyms.
That's great. All right. Thank you, Stacy. Well, that kind of concludes introductions. So Stacy, I want to kick it off to you to go ahead and kind of open up this panel, or anything else that you want to kind of open up the session with. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. So awesomeness. I've been talking with a lot of people. We just got back from the International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference, IACP. I am on the National Sheriff's Association Cybercrime Digital Evidence Working Group too. And the common theme that I keep hearing across the board, whether I'm talking with someone from public safety or law enforcement or courts or wherever, is that change is the only constant. We are just seeing change move faster and faster. It seems like last year we were talking about change, and this year we have artificial intelligence, and suddenly we're talking about change on a whole different scale of what's coming down. So that cyber threat landscape we're dealing with right now has a lot of change to it as well. Obviously, artificial intelligence is changing how malware is even being written, how it's going to be deployed. but we're also seeing it in things like deep fakes and simple scams that we have been dealing with for decades. Those scams are now being modified to use artificial intelligence. I just learned that somebody could take the recording of your voice from your voicemail, that 10-second clip of you talking, and turn it along with a picture of you into a successful artificial intelligence deep fake so they could carry on a conversation just like we are right now. What you really don't know is all of us played switcheroo in the background. We're all somebody else using artificial intelligence at this point. But the whole idea is, if we can do that, imagine what else can be done. There's just an amazing amount that is possible and that we're probably going to see develop within the next couple of years. Obviously, ransomware hasn't gone away yet, but we're seeing a lot more extortion and even sextortion related to ransomware and coming out because it's easier. Why put malware on a computer when you can just create an image and use that? We're seeing something called living off the land. This has been happening for the past several years, but it's becoming more prolific. It means that instead of, again, using malware, all I have to do is use the tools that are already installed on your device, and I can use them against you. And then, of course, with everything that's going on in the world today, we're seeing a return of the hacktivists. So hacktivists may not be targeting state and local governments quite as much as they did in the heyday, but there are an enormous number of hacktivists out there, and state and local governments are getting hit because they're part of the critical infrastructure sector. So we still see that hacktivist problem. I can't go without mentioning CJIS and the new CJIS requirements and moving to 853 and how that is going to change everything in terms of cybersecurity, both in making us more secure, but also making it a lot more difficult to secure our own networks. And of course, we just can't keep going at this rate. We're outpacing the potential for our abilities in creating security, creating successful security products. So today, what I'm going to do as moderator is ask a couple of questions for the captain and Rob and try and get you some help, some better advice about how you can deal with this level of change and what's going on in the world. So Rob, I'm going to start with you again with the first question. Could you please talk to us about what your day looks like, especially as you address that cyber threat landscape?
Thank you, Stacy. Yes, normally, if I'm not putting out a lot of fires, because that seems what it's getting to this day and age with everything going on, it just seems like it's one fire after another after another. But I do try to get in early. The first thing I try to do is get into the forums, look to see what's new, what's happening, to look for those changes and see if I can be proactive. More than ever in this day and age, as a cybersecurity professional, we got to be more proactive. And it's hard to get with, to convince the leadership there that you need the funding to be proactive. Because if you're not, you're behind the curve, and you're going to make yourself a potential target, or at least more of a potential target. So that's kind of what my day looks like, is going through, trying to be proactive when I can, putting out the fires, and then moving more and more towards the zero trust architecture and trying to just fine tune every day and looking at things. Okay, what is a hacker going to look for? What can a malicious actor do? And what can I do to prevent that? And just tweak the rules, tweak policies, ACLs. And so it stays busy.
I can only imagine. So I'm going to ask you, you threw in the term zero trust, which is that big hot term right now. Do you mind explaining that just a little bit, please?
Okay. So on zero trust, it's basically just that back in the, it's like everything goes full circle, because back in the original days of cybersecurity, we just called it block everything and only allow by permit. But zero trust is kind of circling back to that, where you can't trust all the tools out there. Not everybody can keep up. There's so many changes. So one of the best ways to help secure your network is just block everything and then just permit by exception and say, okay, this server can only talk to this server via this port, this protocol, or this server can only accept traffic from the internet, but it only can be on this port protocol, and blocking everything else and trying to get your access control list very, very fine tuned to only allow the traffic that you need. And it's really critical to do that, especially with your internal and with your critical infrastructure that's internal that needs to be protected, and to just really lock everything down as much as you can. It takes a long time. I've been working on it now for a couple of years. It takes a long time to get down to that minute thing, but in today's security world, you have to get to it, and you're not going to finish it if you don't start it.
That's a really good point. Thank you. All right, Captain, so I'm going to throw it your way. How about you? What's your day look like in addressing this current landscape?
A lot like Rob in terms of putting out fires. I think my fires are just a bit of a different flavor. In Fairfax County, I am truly blessed to just have great partnership in the county, kind of other agencies, right? So from the police department, we have our own information technology bureau, but we really kind of report to county TIT, and then we also have a separate InfoSec body. We also have a separate auditor group, and we're currently undergoing an audit. So a lot of what I have to do is kind of find that balance and between functionality and security, and explain kind of the use case of the police department to the InfoSec folks that want to put out new regulations and rules, but then also get the cops to buy in on the InfoSec point of view. And for me, a lot of it comes down to showing places where maybe InfoSec wasn't as tight as it should be, and what can happen when it's not. And when I relate it and try to translate it to the cops, I say, it's our job to protect the community, but these rules that are put on us, they're just not arbitrary. It's really done to help protect us so that we can continue to do our job and serve the community. An example of that is CAD, right? And some of the new IJIS regulations you mentioned, Stacy. We have some legacy vendors for some of our systems, and but our CAD is newer. And previously, we were allowed to copy and paste between different systems because it literally couldn't be configured to prevent that before, and now it can. So it's been done, and that really, the workflow for the officers is a little bit more difficult now, because like something like a VIN or a social security number, they can't copy and paste it out, and they wanted to understand why. And I'm aware there are solutions that could kind of fix that, but with the current tech stack that I have right now, it's a problem that I have to just live with, where their functionality is reduced. And as kind of the rabbling grew to a bit of a roar, I was able to meet with stakeholders and explain why. And I could point to some situations on the East Coast and other law enforcement agencies where tight security regulations, maybe they thought they were there and they weren't, kind of shut down entire public safety operations. So a lot of my job is translating between different groups and making sure everyone's interests are represented. Another IJIS issue is the multi-factor authentication on CAD. This is something that we're in the middle of instituting. So my role is to make sure that our workflow is properly represented, so that I would hate to see a situation where multi-factor authentication prevents an officer from being able to log on and get critical information to respond to an actual emergency of something going on right in front of them, right? Because cyber threats maybe aren't tangible to cops when they're out in the field, but it can be a real threat right in front of them in the window. So that's the balance. And I'm really, again, very lucky to have great partners that I was able to explain our use case. And we did prolonged testing, and we found the fire department uses CADs one way, fire marshals use it another way, the sheriff's office use it another way. And because of our size and complexity, we don't have the same number of CADs as the other agencies to people, right? Different ratio. So you can be on one CAD one day, you could be on the next day. is a configuration challenge, right? Because we were authenticating to the device, but we kept testing, right? And the InfoSec folks are so collaborative that we really came to a solution that is both safe for cybersecurity and safe for the officer. Also you mentioned hacktivism. Part of my role is to give a heads up to InfoSec when we're maybe about to release a body camera video that could be inflammatory to the community, or we could have a prosecution coming down that could be inflammatory, kind of current events within law enforcement that might move the needle in a way where we could become a target, and they'll tighten things down. And that really communication where I can bring kind of the tangible threats of what we're dealing with out in the field or what we're about to do that might bring undue attention, the InfoSec folks can then respond to that and tighten things down where they need to. Fairfax County, I often joke that we have a bureaucracy that could put the federal government to shame. And at times I do have my frustration points with that. But the number of checks and balances we have does keep us safe. And I just can't deny that, right? So there is a method to the madness. It just might give me a lot more gray hair and frustrate some of my leadership when they want to see things go a bit faster, right? Because it's always, we needed this yesterday when we're buying something. And that's just not how we operate. But being able to kind of explain why the folks, and we call it, kind of down the street because their buildings across the street from us, do things a certain way allows kind of people to be a little bit more collaborative and represent their interests. So that's sort of what my day looks like. A lot of communication, listening, and trying to bridge the gap.
Very cool. So it's almost sounds like part of how you address security is on a shifting basis for your IT assets. When things are a little bit less worrisome, your security is perhaps a little bit more focused on letting the user do what they need to do to be the most efficient. But then when things need to be tightened up, you tighten them up in response to real world events. Is that what I'm getting?
Sort of. I mean, we have a baseline that we're just not going to go below, right? And certainly instituting legal requirements like IJIS, there's really not a lot of wiggle room there, right? But in other areas, when we have real-time threats, it doesn't always end up in the form of user restriction. It ends up more in the form of like monitoring and maybe locking down different ports, and it really just paying attention more to outside threat factors that might be coming into the enterprise. Our users certainly are challenging at many points, but for the threats I'm discussing where we change our posture specifically, that's going to be really looking for those outside threats coming in.
Cool. Okay. Definitely a more modern approach, if you will. Yeah. All right, Rob. So how about you? What are some of the steps you've taken to address the security of your IT assets and your staff?
Thanks, Stacey. Well, definitely training. You have to really do a lot of training. That's got to be at the forefront of anything that you're going to be implementing and doing. And you really have to really show the users and leadership, what is the benefit and sometimes that can get hard because like the captain said, it's people see security as a non-tangible. And so like when we implemented MFA a while back and we went to do this, we started off first just doing the IT staff first, make sure they got all used to it. And we took that step, and then we went and actually started doing some of the leadership here to make sure that they understood what we were doing and why and how it would work before we went and implemented it out in the field. When we implemented it out, then we first started doing only the high-risk users, people that were flagged because they got their accounts compromised and various things. And then kind of got the word out there that we were doing this. And then we finally deployed it out statewide. And so you really have to take it in micromanaged steps, and training has to be essential across the board because, again, people don't understand why you have to do cybersecurity. They think it's just this big umbrella out there that just happens, and they don't understand that it actually takes a lot of work, and not just on the behalf of the cybersecurity professionals, but it's a lot of work on the user's part. Training them, it's easy to tell them don't click on the link in the email, but they're going to click on the link on the email. You really have to train them not to do that. And it takes a while. You have to really get them to understand to slow down and don't click on that link. And go forward with that. And when, you know, they're used to going out to these websites and all of a sudden they can't get to the websites anymore. And that's going to be a complaint. You have to explain to them why those websites are now blocked, and try to really explain to them what the threat was. And just can't say, well, it's a security thing. They don't buy off on that. It's got to be detailed as to why you're doing it, what's coming down. Like the captain mentioned, the new IJIS requirements. A lot of it, you know, it's out of our hands. Those are the requirements now that we have to comply with. And, you know, a lot of times it's, well, I'm sorry, but this is the requirements. This is the new law. We have to do this, and it's out of our hands. But you have to give them that training, and you have to give them a detailed explanation as to why, and put it into terms that they'll understand. In the Air Force, we had to, you know, everybody was pilots, you know, that in leadership. So we had to explain it in terms a pilot would understand. We had to relate everything to flight. Now in the courts, now we have to relate everything to somehow to tie it into what judicial and law, so they can put it into a concept that they can understand. And so you can move forward.
So I really liked that example you gave about MFA and getting your executives to understand and roll it out slowly, so you had their buy-in. Do you have any other examples of how you got executive support to make an investment in cybersecurity?
So when we, back in the day when we were doing, when I first got here, we looked at doing the locking down of the databases where they had, a lot of people had access into the databases where they could change things. So we have one of the applications that gets actually shared where law enforcement, probation officers, the courts, court referral officers, etc., all had access. And what we had to do was, this is a bad idea letting everybody have full access into this and having change access. And so I was able to go in and show on one particular individual, because let's face it, here we're dealing with criminals. They're going to lie. I'm sure the captain can attest to that. They're going to give false social security numbers. They're going to give false addresses. Well, we had the one where a person said this was his social and address here, then it was here. Then when he went to probation, it was this. When he was at community corrections, it was this. And so within a span of a month, we were able to show him the change logs where his social changed like 3 times, his address changed multiple times. So now, you know, we had to lock down where the databases where, okay, only these offices can change the data, and they got to verify, and just can't take word of mouth, and we can't just let anybody just change stuff on the fly. And so it might sound better. Well, he moved and we got it up. Well, did he really move? Did the individual actually do this? Did you check their social security card to make sure that is their actual social security, vice versa? So, and by showing that in the change logs, where then it was able to get the buy-in on the leadership at that time, to where we could take a lot of rights away from a lot of the areas and restrict down who can and have access to actually change the data within those records.
That's a really cool example. Thanks for sharing. So, Captain, how about you? Do you have any suggestions or ideas about how you've gotten your executive support to invest in cybersecurity and preventing cyber threats in your organization?
Sure. So a few ways I like to, well, first I'm going to start with, Rob said something I really like. It's explaining the why, right? That's fundamental for not just executives, but every user. When you have time and you're able to, explain the why can build support and buy-in, because cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. So some of the things we do are, required annual training. We do, our InfoSec does different testing and sort of looking for the weak points, typically users clicking on links, and then that will lead to remedial training. So we try to identify weaknesses proactively. Getting executive support comes in, we show them the results of that, right? Show them the results of some of the weaknesses that we have. We have auditors that come in and I know we're going to get dinged on a few things. It's any audit, but sharing those results with the executive leadership, but pairing security with increased features. And then Rob mentioned auditing. In the police department, we love to have audit logs about who did what when. So usually that kind of goes with security, right? And then we also here we relay things sort of like to criminal actions, right? Like Rob did in the Air Force with pilots. So when you explain the cyber threat landscape and how it enables crime, certainly we don't want to be a victim, right? And this type of data we deal with is really, really sensitive. And the way we prevent that is by getting executive buy-in. So the most success I've had, though, is pairing it with increased capabilities. And I'm a believer in the cloud being a lot more secure in the way we currently do things across a number of systems and applications. So the cloud also brings increased capabilities with it. So, hey, we're going to the cloud. We're going to have single sign-on, right? Hey, this is great. Or monitoring Active Directory groups, right? We have different distribution lists, and some people aren't supposed to get information one way or another. So by being proactive there, leadership appreciates that, because then they have assurances that not just that we're secure, but really things are only going to the places they're supposed to. So a lot of times you can have the approach of it's better not to be seen or heard, but occasionally you have to take that victory lap and show them what you're doing.
Perfect. And it keeps you off the front page of the newspapers, or at least in theory.
That's my goal.
There you go. I think that's all our goals. All right. So I have to ask this before we open it up for questions from the audience, because somebody is going to ask it from the audience. What's one thing that keeps you up at night, and what are you doing about it? Captain, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, beyond the New York Mets, and there's not much I can do about them, is digital forensic evidence. You and I have talked about that, Stacy. And what keeps me up at night is the way we currently handle that, and a detective dropping a thumb drive full of CSAM material in a court room and someone picking that up, or a sexting case and somebody picking that up. What am I doing about it? We are looking at digital evidence management solutions in the cloud for digital forensics evidence. Not a lot of times when you say that, people think of body camera. I don't know that I personally would call that digital evidence. I would just call that body camera footage that's stored in the cloud. But I'm talking about digital forensic evidence, phone dumps, computer dumps, social media returns, phone pings, things like that. Very sensitive, very private. And the people, even though a lot of times, most of the time, they're criminals, they don't deserve to have their information exposed. So we are looking at cloud-based solutions that really fit our model, which is we're a large and complex agency. So we can't just throw it on a server somewhere, and pairing it with an RMS effort. So that's what I'm doing about it. It's very easy for me to sit here and say that's what I'm doing. And I've learned it is very challenging to execute and implement. Although we're having successes, things just take so long.
I'm really glad to hear you're having successes, though. Sometimes it's the little wins that really make a difference.
I'm an optimist.
I am too. All right, Rob, how about you in the courts?
What keeps me up, what we kind of mentioned earlier, is the evolving, changing landscape with the cybersecurity. It's, when I first started back in cybersecurity many, many years ago, we used to joke that, give it a month and the landscape's going to change. Well, then after a while, it came to give it a week. Then it came to a day. Now it's like it's by the minute the landscape changes. And it's so much getting thrown. Mentioned earlier, the IA, artificial intelligence. It's changing the landscape in so many ways and so fast. And it's hard to keep up with this evolving when you're already just putting out fires day to day. It's hard to come up with a security plan on what do we do to mitigate this, how do we go about doing this. And so that's the main thing that keeps me up at night, is just the the fast pace of how the malicious actors are responding and being able to throw things at you, and you're sitting there constantly, like you wake up at 2 a.m. and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I know I can do this now, and then trying to remember it so when you get to work the next morning you can implement it, and it gets really hard. But that's what really keeps me up at night, is just how fast paced it's going, and trying to stay ahead of the malicious actors so you can keep your network safe, to keep you out of the newspapers, because you don't want to be in the papers.
No, definitely not. So what you just said actually brings me back to something you mentioned at the very beginning. You get into work early so you can check and see what's going on. Is that the case?
Yes, a lot of time I did it. Yes, I got a string of forums that I like to go into and read and look at. Plus, I go to CISA, MSISAC, and look at anything, see if there's anything new published for vulnerabilities that might apply to our network that we have to do. And if I do, I get those emails out to the appropriate teams and say, hey, there's these vulnerabilities that were on this. I know we got this here. It applies to us. Please get a plan in action on when these can get patched, and let's go forward. And so you got to know what's on your network to be able to do that. And you have to be able to also go out and get reliable intel on things. And some of them, are slow coming out. Some of the vulnerabilities, it's like, wait a minute, that's been out there for 3 weeks and I'm just finding out about it. That's not good. So it gets challenging.
Oh, it definitely does. For those of you who don't know, CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So they publish a lot of alerts and vulnerabilities you can sign up for on their website, and you'll get emails or notices, other types of things. MSISAC is the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It is a nonprofit part of the Center for Internet Security, but it's funded by CISA. So it's actually free for any and all state and local governments to join. And same thing, you get emails and other notifications. Before I move on to the next question, Captain, are there any particular sources you recommend that you use on a routine basis?
Well, I'll start with Jim Emerson. But seriously, a lot of the ones that Rob mentioned, and then really networking with your peers, right? So for me and you, Stacy, we're members of the International Association of Chiefs of Police Cybercrime and Digital Evidence Committee. And I learned more there, not just about threats, but also best practices and emerging case law on how to handle some of this evidence, because it's not just protecting from threats, it's protecting from legal peril, right? So there's a number of different considerations that I need to take into account, and I don't have all the answers. I have really smart people that work with me. If I sound smart today, it's only because the people that work with me are much smarter than I am, and I have a good team. But really, just continuing to network across public and private sector. More than my neighbor across the street is in cybersecurity, and at the bus stop every morning, he's telling me the latest things, and his name is Chris. Chris is my source. Yeah.
Okay, your sources are Chris and Jim. I don't know Chris, but I'm pretty positive Jim's going to get upset at me if I give out his contact information so everybody can call him every morning. I will throw in, just from my own personal perspective, I really like the SANS podcast. They come out very early in the morning, and it tends to keep me up to date on those vulnerabilities and threats. Larry, before I move on, anything you want to add?
Anything I want to add? Yeah, well, one thing from what I read and what I track, definitely CISA, which has already been mentioned, right? Please, the audience, sign up for the mailing list. It takes you 1 second to put your email address in there. It is very, very helpful with vulnerabilities. Some of the other ones that you all mentioned, I also follow. There are plenty of websites out there. It's just find the ones that look good to you, that are easy to read for you, and just bookmark them. And then similar thing. I wake up in the morning, start work. Hopefully I have even 15 minutes before things get crazy, and I do read through Yeah, as many as I can there. Secondly, I wanted to chime in a bit. I was being respectful of the panel and the questions, but I did want to chime in a bit on the question around how do you gain executive support? When you're talking to an executive, I think it's very important that you show that you are being proactive as opposed to reactive with things. Certainly, every one of us could be reactive and go to our boss, go to our executive with this vulnerability, this threat, this attack that happened yesterday or the day before. So try to be proactive. And one of the best ways to be proactive with an executive is to get them to buy into a framework. Get them to buy into a roadmap that you and your team, or if you have a team, bless you, that's great if you have one. But even if you don't, find a roadmap, bring it to your executive and say, hey, I want to roll this framework out at my agency, at my company, and tell them why. To the captain's point, tell them why you're doing this. And that's where you can really get the hooks in. A lot of these frameworks map back to compliance standards that the executive is going to care about. And the other piece of it is, once you get to the executive level, and I'm sure all of you see this, right? Your managers, your boss, these executives, they like to see charts. They like to see dashboards. They like to see numbers. They don't want to read a very lengthy document. And with these frameworks, you can actually put a maturity score towards it. So you can go to that executive on the first day and say, hey, I want us to adopt X framework. As of today, we are a score of a 1.5 out of 5. I believe our goal should be to get to a 3.0. Do you agree with that, executive? Okay, yes, you do. And this is going to be the roadmap. This is how we're going to be proactive. And we're going to follow this roadmap to eventually get to a 3. And a 3 might take you 5-10 years, but at least you can show that executive the investments that are being made are continually to mature that framework. So that is I think that hopefully that's a good suggestion for all of you.
No, I think that's really great, and a great idea about how you can help educate those public sector decision makers who have no cybersecurity or technical expertise at all, especially elected officials, because typically they're coming in with different skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, Captain, do either one of you have something you want to add? Captain, I see you went off mute here.
I scare them.
You scare them.
I scare
Okay.
them. I take real world examples and I scare them. I'll bring them down to the forensics lab and I'll say, look at this. This is somebody's phone. What's on your phone? Can I dump that and put it out publicly? Yeah, exactly. Can't do that. And I've gotten great support. But when you put it in terms that they understand, in a big meeting full of command staff, think about everything that's on your phone right now. We're pulling that from victims, suspects, witnesses. Are you okay with us taking your phone's contents and putting that out on the internet? Think about the worst crimes that we investigate. Are you okay with that material going out into the public? Then we got to do something about it. And then whenever someone else falls victim, just occasionally just, hey, did you guys see this? You hear about that? And, and when InfoSec is maybe being, and I'll be honest, InfoSec, they don't care if they're considered the bad guy, but they do want to have, they'd rather not be. They'd rather have kind of partnership, but sharing those real world examples can get real buy-in, and then being reasonable, right? Of, hey, they're working with us, they're sitting down at the table, but they're not alarmists. This is real stuff. It's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And scaring them seems very appropriate for the fact that it is October 26th. Rob, any other techniques you use?
Well, it's kind of like the same that Captain did, but instead of calling it scaring them, I call it learning through the pain of others. Taking the real world examples that are from other law enforcement, from judicial things around the state and say, okay, this is just what happened here, and this is how they got breached, and this is, we have the same vulnerability. Now, do we need to, and then work in that and getting through it, and we've been able to show the pain through others, what they've gone through, and showing them, hey, you know, it cost them 10 million to resolve this, you know, so we want to pay 10 million later, or do you want to pay me the 100,000 now? And that seems that, you know, that's probably one of the better way of getting leadership to understand too, is what's happening out there, and just, it's what I call to the pain.
I think that's a Princess Bride quote, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. And that's something like 40th anniversary this year. So again, perfect timing. So just a quick question then, to the pain. What is there, like, one thing that you have had your staff do to make the pain less? What cybersecurity thing could they be doing better that you've worked and coaxed them to do better?
Communication. When we have an update or a change coming, or when there's an outage, a lot of the attention is directed towards recovering, and it's tough to always tell what the problem is, and you know, if it's something that's going to be fixed quickly, do we really need to communicate? I err on the side of communicating, and one of the attendees who's here in the audience from my county, she is a great partner of mine, and she we just communicate. I probably talk to her once a day, and you know, what systems are up and running, and we try to work together, and then also communicate within the agency about what's going on, and that helps reduce tickets that then my staff will ultimately have to deal with, because we've communicated on a broad scale. No, it's not just you, the whole system's having an issue. But I really think communication alleviates a large majority of problems. People can understand outages, they can understand that we have problems and logistical issues. What they don't really care for is being in the dark.
That notorious black hole. Yeah. Rob?
I'm going to go on with communication as well, but slightly different on the security side, in that, you know, change management, where staff goes and makes changes without going and talking to security or other ones, and now they unknowingly created a vulnerability that wasn't there before because they made a change, and then you find that later on down the road, and then it's like, and then of course everybody's like, well, I don't remember that. Yeah. So communication is the key to everything, no matter in just what direction you're going with that communication. But it needs to happen, and there needs to be a better process in place for communications across the board.
Awesome. And just from personal experience, I would say one of the things I had luck with is communicating that I'm not scary. I mean, I know I look really scary, but communicating that you could come talk to me about a problem and I'm not going to assume that you did something wrong seemed to make a huge difference, at least with the folks that I worked with.
Stacey, that is such a great point, because in policing, we have this concept of community policing where we're in a community and you know us before there's a problem, so things can go much better. And I would say our InfoSec and our support teams do the same. And our InfoSec director, some might say he's scary. Personally, you know, the guy is wonderful, and he's brilliant. And you know, we show him what we're doing, right? So when we're in digital forensics, hey, this is how we're encountering these problems, and occasionally we have to solve problems for him. And really having that relationship before something goes wrong, that community policing model applied to cybersecurity is just invaluable.
Awesome. Very cool. I had never thought of it like that, but yeah, that works. All right. So couple last questions, and Larry, I'm going to send them your way. Feel free to punt them over to Ashwini if you really need to, or we can get back to people later. But are there any business cases that IJIS has available that folks can use to help illustrate these cases that cybersecurity is necessary? We need to put funding into it now before the pain.
All right. There are, I mean, there are definitely use cases out there. And I think this is a great question because it puts on our radar the fact that we probably need to develop more of these use cases. But I'm even thinking about, I had referenced at the beginning of the meeting, the larger kind of security program document that we have. There are a few use cases in there. We're putting out a frameworks document that's coming out very soon as well. And in there, it just talks about kind of, this is why you should choose, where we actually recommend a framework in there. So it does recommend, you know, there, and it gives you some use cases or some kind of stories that you can tell your executives. But, you know, to the broader question, I think it's a great call out, that we should keep that at the forefront really whenever we're producing content. And Stacy's on the working group too, and so is Brendan, and we're going to try to get Rob on it as well very soon. So I think all of us, like when we're creating content, we'll certainly kind of keep that at the top of our mind to make sure that we include some use cases in there as well. But I mean, IJIS has a lot of content. They have a lot of content out there around different topics. So I mean, that's off the top of my mind. Stacy, I don't know if you're back to you, if you're aware of any as well.
I do know that they have some business cases out there documented already, but I really like your idea. Let's see if we can add to that pile too. And for those who are asking about business cases, I would say reach out and we will see what we can get you too. But please also volunteer to be part of the working group so we can create some more. I got to put
that's a good call out, Stacy, right? Because I mean, we're a collective. You saw it on the screen. There's probably, let's call it 15 of us maybe in the working group, right? But we need people all over the place bringing different trains of thought and different questions. The 15 of us are trying to come up with kind of content to produce to all of you, but this is exactly what we need. We need more and more of this feedback and people getting engaged with us.
Great. And there's another question right along those lines. Are members of the committee available in the future to help support challenges?
I think the devil's in the details with what available means.
There's 15 of us. There's
we're going
plus.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely trying to be more available, right? We're going to be doing more and more of these webinars. We are soon going to be having a podcast that tries to come out at least an episode a month. So we're making ourselves available that way. But to the person who asked, or if there's other people, if you have a specific problem that you're trying to solve, sure, challenge the working group. We'll be happy to take on that challenge. And whether it's, you know, us having a phone call with you or a Zoom call like we're doing today to give you more detail, yeah, we'd be open to it. Just feel free to reach out, and we'll probably, we'll make sure that we keep it private, but we'll probably share what we learned working with that individual with the broader community as well. Because if you have the question and the problem, there are 100 other people that have that question and that problem.
Great point. And I'm going to take this last one unless any of you have anything you want to add. So the question about Department of Justice, specifically BJA or DHS, CISA, FEMA solutions that our folks can put in place. Are there grants or other solutions? We already mentioned, Rob brought them up. CISA itself has several. MS ISAC is a huge solution. CISA also has a list of resources out there that are free and other things they can do. It's not just alerts, it's all types of other services like scanning your networks. So I can tell you right away, CISA does. I know I just heard from BJA last week that there are all kinds of grants out there for these purposes. So FEMA also has them. I know that from some experience. Well worth looking into both BJA and FEMA grants that can be used for cybersecurity purposes. One of the most recent ones I know of is from CISA, though, and that one actually went to state CISOs with the express intent of moving it out to the local governments. So also ask your state CISO. Anybody have anything else, Captain Rob? Do you know of any others that I didn't just mention?
I think you got it covered, Stacy.
Okay. I mean, I would love to tell you there's more free money, but nobody seems to give away money a lot. All right.
The
Just regarding-
MSISAC though does
go ahead,
offer a
Rob.
lot of free services though to state and local governments as well.
I'm sorry, who was that?
MSISAC.
MSISAC. Yep.
Yes, they, you know, along the lines with CISA, but they do offer a lot of free services to state and local government. So if you're a state or local government, any agency, I recommend you sign up for MSISAC.
Very cool.
And then
Hey-
I'm just gonna plug IJIS again. I know that we get together at least once a month more at a committee level to kind of have just brainstorm on what other content we want to put out. And we have discussed a few times putting out some content on how we can help individuals with these grants and this money that is available. So that's probably a teaser to look forward to. That I wouldn't say it's coming out tomorrow, but it is something we've been discussing. And I believe it does make a lot of sense for us to put some time and energy into producing some sort of content or document around that.
Great. And I also see that IJIS has said that they will send registrants a copy of this recording. So yes, you will have access to it. It'll also be on the IJIS website and YouTube pages. So IJIS is right up there at the top of the list of resources. I think that is all we have time for today. Thank you everybody for joining us. Any last goodbye, Larry?
No, Stacy, great job moderating. I want to thank the captain and Rob for participating, and just thank the audience for taking the time today to listen to this webinar, and also the people that put in questions. There's always a nervousness that people aren't going to ask questions, but we did get some great ones. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.